The gas station was quiet, the kind of place people didn't linger unless they had to. The flickering neon sign above the entrance cast a sickly yellow glow over the cracked pavement. A few moths batted against the buzzing lights, and the air smelled like cheap gasoline and stale cigarettes. Walt Hayes stepped out of his truck, moving slow but steady. Deliberate, controlled. His boots hit the pavement with a solid thud, the limp in his left leg barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't paying attention. But Walt noticed everything. He always had. His eyes flicked across the parking lot as he adjusted the collar of his flannel shirt. 3 of them, young, cocky. The way they stood, the way they moved. He knew their kind. They weren't looking for trouble. They thought they had already found it. Walt sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. He just wanted to grab some damn coffee and go home. But life had a way of dragging men like him back into the fight. Inside the gas station, the cashier, a wiry kid barely out of high school, gave Walt a nervous glance as he grabbed a coffee and a pack of jerky. The boy's fingers drummed anxiously against the counter. "You should hurry," the kid muttered under his breath, glancing toward the parking lot. "Those guys out there, they've been messing with people all night." Walt didn't react, just handed the kid a 5 and grabbed his change. He already knew the kind of men waiting outside. They'd been watching him the second he pulled in. He stepped out into the night air, coffee in one hand, his other resting casually at his side. Loose, ready. Dante, Rico, and Vic. He didn't know their names yet, but he knew their type. Dante, the leader, lean, mean, full of bad ideas. He had a smirk that didn't reach his eyes and a blade tucked into the back pocket of his sagging jeans. Rico, the muscle, big guy, not much brain. He rolled his shoulders like he thought it made him look tougher. And Vic, the wild card, shifty, twitchy, the kind of guy who didn't know how to hold his hands still. Walt sighed, already exhausted. As he reached for his truck door, Dante stepped in front of him. "Hey, old-timer," Dante said, flashing that lazy smirk. Rico and Vic closed in behind him, sealing Walt off from the rest of the parking lot. Walt's grip on his coffee tightened slightly, not out of fear, just annoyance. Dante tapped a finger against Walt's truck. "Nice ride, classic. Bet it's worth a lot, huh?" Walt didn't respond. "Bet you got some cash in that wallet, too," Dante continued. "Why don't you do yourself a favor and—" Walt moved his coffee to his left hand. That was the only warning he gave them, because Walt had spent a lifetime reading people. And these punks, they weren't ready, not for him. Dante frowned, suddenly irritated by the silence. "I'm talking to you, Grandpa." "You sure about that?" Walt asked, his voice calm. "Steady." Dante snorted, shaking his head. "Man, I'm trying to be nice here. I don't want to have to—" Walt moved, faster than any of them expected. His right hand lashed out, grabbing Dante's wrist and twisting hard. The knife Dante had been about to pull clattered to the pavement. Dante let out a sharp yelp, his smirk vanishing in an instant. Rico lunged forward, but Walt was already pivoting. He hooked his boot behind Rico's ankle and sent the big man crashing to the ground face first. Vic froze, his eyes wide, suddenly realizing they had made a very, very big mistake. Dante tried to yank his arm free, but Walt only twisted harder, making the kid drop to his knees. "You should have walked away," Walt muttered. He shoved Dante back, letting him collapse against the pavement. All 3 thugs were on the ground. None of them had touched him. None of them even knew how he did it. And now, it was too late. Walt stepped over them, calm as ever, and picked up his coffee from where he had set it on the hood of his truck. He took a slow sip. Then he looked down at them, expression unreadable. "You boys should be glad I've slowed down in my old age." Dante groaned, clutching his wrist, eyes wide with genuine fear. Rico spat blood onto the pavement, blinking in shock, his face already swelling from where he'd hit the ground. Vic just sat there, silent, breathing fast, his hands trembling like a kid caught with his fingers in the cookie jar. The gas station lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Walt took another slow sip of his coffee. Nobody moved, nobody dared to move. He let the silence stretch, let it weigh heavy on their chests. Dante swallowed hard, trying to pull himself together. What the hell, man?" His voice wasn't cocky anymore. Walt just stared at him, unblinking. "Stand up," Walt said, his tone flat. Dante hesitated. He wasn't used to taking orders. Walt took a slow step forward, and suddenly, Dante was scrambling to his feet. "You wanna act tough?" Walt continued, taking another sip. "Then stand up and take your ass kicking like a man." Dante wiped his mouth, looking at his two friends for backup. They didn't move. They didn't even breathe, because they knew. This wasn't some old man. This was something else, something dangerous. Dante staggered back, shaking his head. "Screw this, man. Let's go." But Walt wasn't done. "You think you can walk away from this?" he asked, voice dangerously low. Dante's head snapped up. "What else do you want?" Walt tilted his head as if considering. Then he looked at Dante's knife on the ground. "Pick it up," Walt said. Dante froze. Vic sucked in a breath. "Dude, don't!" Dante hesitated, glancing between Walt and the knife. "Go ahead," Walt said, stepping back. "Pick it up." His tone was calm, even, like he was just asking Dante to grab a quarter off the ground. Dante's hand trembled, because now he understood. If he picked that knife up, he wouldn't leave this parking lot in one piece. This wasn't a fight, this was a warning, a line in the sand. Dante slowly shook his head. Walt nodded. Smart choice. He took another sip of coffee. Now, get the hell out of here. The three of them scrambled to their feet, backing away like cornered animals. They didn't even run. They just walked, stiff, tense, like they were afraid that if they moved too fast, Walt might change his mind. Walt watched them go. He knew their type. They wouldn't be back. As Walt turned back toward his truck, he noticed the gas station cashier standing just inside the glass doors. The kid's eyes were huge. You want me to call the cops?" the kid asked, voice shaky. Walt snorted, shaking his head. "Cops won't do a damn thing, and those boys just learned a lesson the hard way." The kid swallowed, nodding quickly. Walt pulled open his truck door and slid in, exhaling slowly. The fight hadn't lasted more than 30 seconds. But that's all it took. That's all it ever needed to take. He turned the key, the old engine rumbled to life, and he took one last look at the empty parking lot in his mirror. Then he drove off. Just another night, just another lesson, because some men fight for fun, some men fight for survival. And then there are men like Walt Hayes, men you should never, ever pick a fight with.